For 30 years, the people of Wren, South Carolina, watched Mabel Whitaker push a rusty grocery cart down Mill Street every Tuesday morning. Rain or shine, she passed Sykes' Grocery, the boarded diner, and the empty brick mouth of the Hartwell textile mill. Then she turned toward Tan Yard Road with 4 things in the cart: cornbread wrapped in brown paper, a jar of apple preserves, a quart of milk, a packet of cinnamon drops tied with string. She carried them like they mattered more than silver. 1 mile out of town, she stopped at a sagging bungalow nobody had lived in for decades. She set the food on the porch, spoke into the empty house, hummed a little tune, and walked home alone. By the 2nd year, people called it grief. By the 10th, they called it strange. By the 30th, they said old Mabel Whitaker had lost her mind. They were wrong. And the man who would prove them wrong had not eaten in 2 days when he stepped off the curb and said the 6 words that changed everything. "Let me help you, ma'am." Nobody else stopped. That was the part Elias Mercer would remember long after Wren learned shame. People were on Mill Street that morning. Idella Sykes had just unlocked her grocery door. 2 men leaned against a truck. A mother with a little girl stood by the pharmacy. They saw the front wheels snap off Mabel's cart. They saw the cart pitch toward the gutter. They saw Mabel grab the handle, 1 shoe sliding off the curb. And still, nobody moved. That was how Wren had become since the mill closed. People learned not to look too closely at things breaking. Not a porch, not a business, not a man sleeping behind chain link, not an old woman fighting a cart. Looking meant caring, and caring meant remembering what had been lost. Elias crossed anyway. He was 31 years old, though hunger and weather had carved him older. His coat came from a church box. His boots were patched with wire. At night, he slept in an old delivery van behind the Hartwell textile mill. He made money however he could. Pulling brass from dead machines, selling scrap, fixing a hinge for a sandwich, sharpening a knife for $2. He had a cough deep in his chest, the kind a man pretends is nothing, because truth costs more than he has. But he was quick when it mattered. He caught the cart by its bent frame before it dragged Mabel down. The weight twisted his empty stomach, but he held it. "I have it, ma'am," he said. "You are all right. I have it." Mabel Whitaker looked up at him. Her eyes surprised him. He had expected cloudy eyes, the kind people described when they lowered their voices, but Mabel's eyes were sharp gray. They moved over his beard, hollow cheeks, torn cuff, and hands that had caught her without asking for thanks. Then she looked at the broken wheel. "That wheel has been threatening me for a month," she said. "I suppose this morning it kept its word." "I can carry the bags for you," Elias said. "Wherever you are headed." She studied him. "It is a long walk, Mr. Mercer," he said. "Elias Mercer." "A long walk, Mr. Mercer. Past the last streetlight." Elias looked at the bags. The warm cornbread breathed through the paper, and his hunger rose sharply. "Then we ought to start before the sun gets mean," he said. Mabel's mouth softened. So Elias lifted the broken corner against his hip, balanced the cart on its 3 good wheels, and waited for her to lead. Behind them, the town watched. Ahead of them, Tan Yard Road waited. And in the bottom of 1 grocery bag, the cinnamon drops clicked with every step, like a secret counting down. The first part of the walk was quiet. Mabel Whitaker moved slowly, but she did not move like a helpless woman. She moved like someone who had taken this road so many times, her bones remembered each crack in it. Elias kept the broken cart corner pressed against his hip and listened to the wheel complain. They passed the pharmacy with the faded green awning. They passed the diner where the word open still hung in the window, though no coffee had been poured there in 9 years. They passed the Hartwell textile mill, its windows punched black, its smokestack pointing at what the town used to be. Elias did not look toward the fence behind it. He did not want Mabel to see the old delivery van where he slept. Past the last row of houses, the sidewalk ended. The road narrowed into cracked asphalt, then gravel. Weeds leaned over the ditches. Pine trees thickened on both sides. The town's sounds fell away until there was only the cart, Mabel's breath, and the dry hush of summer insects. "You do this every week," Elias said. "Every Tuesday," she answered. "Must be someone important." Mabel did not answer for a long time. "Everyone hungry is important," she said at last. That shut him up, because his stomach had cramped twice since Mill Street, and he was afraid the noise might give him away. At the top of a small rise, the bungalow appeared. It sat back from Tan Yard Road, behind a yard gone wild with grass and blackberry thorns. The porch leaned low on one side. One shutter hung by a single nail. The windows were dark, and two were broken. An oak tree, dead at the crown, bent over the roof like it had been waiting to hear a confession. Nobody lived there. Nobody could have. Mabel stopped at the gate. "This is the place," she said. Elias looked at the house, then at the food. He wanted to ask who it was for. He wanted to ask why the town let an old woman come this far alone. He wanted to ask a dozen things, but her face had changed. The sharpness had gone, leaving something careful and sacred. "Mind the third step," she said. "It is rotten through." Elias carried the bags up the porch. The boards bowed under his boots. He set the cornbread by the doorframe, then the apple preserves, then the milk, then the packet of cinnamon drops. He arranged them in a neat row, away from the rain stain on the boards. The smell of cornbread rose warm and sweet. For one bad second, his hands did not want to let it go. He let it go anyway. Mabel climbed only 2 steps. She put one hand on the rail and leaned toward the dark doorway. "I brought cornbread today," she said softly. "Real butter in it, the way you liked. There are apple preserves too. Eat before you go wandering. You always did think hunger was something you could out-stubborn." Then she hummed. It was a small tune, no more than a few notes. It rose, once fell twice, and ended like a question left on a porch. When she turned back, Elias was staring. Mabel saw the question in his face. "I know Mr. Mercer," she said. "I know no one is in there." Then she stepped down carefully. Elias looked at the empty doorway, the food, the old woman, and the long road home. And somehow, it did not feel like madness. It felt like grief still keeping house. Elias came back the next Tuesday with a wheel in his hand. It was not new. Nothing in Elias Mercer's life was new. He had pulled it from a broken laundry cart behind the thrift store, cleaned the axle, and worked rust loose with a pocket knife. By sunrise, he bolted it to Mabel Whitaker's grocery cart. She found him outside Sykes' grocery, crouched on the curb, turning the wheel with 2 fingers. "You fixed it," she said. It seemed tired of limping, Elias answered. Mabel looked at him for a long moment. Then she put 4 items in the cart. Cornbread, apple preserves, milk, cinnamon drops. Neither of them discussed whether he would come along. He simply took the handle when the bags were paid for, and she let him. That was how it began. 1 Tuesday became 2. 2 became 6. The town watched from windows and porches as the old widow and the hungry repairman walked out toward Tan Yard Road. Nobody asked if Mabel was safer now. Nobody thanked Elias for making the trip easier. Small towns notice kindness, but they do not always know what to do when the kind man has no address. Elias learned her by small things. She counted her change twice at Sykes' grocery, not because she lacked money, but because poverty had trained her hands before the house belonged to her. She wore gloves even in warm weather because her fingers ached. She polished her shoes every Monday night. She never bought cinnamon drops for herself. She bought them, carried them, left them on the porch, and took the old unopened packet home, as if candy deserved burial. Once after hard rain, Mabel invited him to the house on the hill to dry his coat. Elias stood in her parlor and tried not to touch anything. The house was too large for one old woman. Every hallway held silence. Every curtain was clean. Every clock was wound. And everywhere on shelves and mantels and windowsills sat small wooden animals carved by the same patient hand. Foxes mostly. Thin foxes with pointed noses. Sleeping foxes curled around their tails. A mother fox carrying a kit by the scruff. Some were rough, the work of a boy. Others were smooth and clever, the work of a young man learning what his hands could do. Mabel saw him looking. "My Caleb carved those," she said. Then she picked up one fox, touched the underside with her thumb, and set it down before Elias could see what was carved there. He did not ask. There were questions grief did not owe a stranger, but the answers came anyway, one Tuesday at a time. Caleb Whitaker had been her only child. He hated the mill, hated the money, hated how the Hartwell name made men lower their voices and women straighten their backs. At 20, he left the house on the hill and moved into the bungalow on Tan Yard Road. Mabel thought pride would wear out. It did not. The last time she saw him, they argued on that porch. He said he would rather go hungry than come home bought and owned. She told him, crying, that if hunger was what he wanted, she hoped it taught him something. Then she turned back before she reached the gate. "No," she said. "If you ever come home hungry, food will be waiting." 3 weeks later, fever took him. Mabel stopped speaking and set the cinnamon drops by the empty door. "I know he is not there," she said. "I am not confused." Her eyes found Elias. "But if I stop bringing food, Mr. Mercer, then the last promise I ever made my boy becomes a lie." Elias looked at the dark doorway and said nothing, because some promises were not meant to feed the living. Some were meant to keep the dead from leaving twice. Grant Whitaker first noticed Elias on a Tuesday when the sun was too bright and the town was too quiet. Grant sat inside his black sedan across from Sykes' grocery, watching Mabel come out with Elias beside her. Elias lifted the bags before she reached for them. Mabel said something that made the hungry man smile. Then they started toward Tan Yard Road, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Grant's smile did not move. For 20 years he had waited politely for the Whitaker house, the mill land, and everything Mabel still owned to fall into his hands. He called her Aunt Mabel, though no Whitaker blood ran through him. His uncle had married into the name, and Grant had spent half his life acting as if patience were the same thing as inheritance. A homeless man walking beside the old woman every week was not patience. It was a threat. Grant did not confront Elias at first. Men like Grant preferred clean hands. He sat in the back booth at the gas station coffee shop and spoke in a low voice to whoever would listen. He said Mabel was getting confused. He said Elias Mercer had appeared at just the right time. He said old widows were easy targets for men who slept behind fences and counted other people's money before it was theirs. He never said he wanted the property. He said he was worried. In Wren, worry was a respectable knife. The rumor reached Sykes' grocery before Elias did. That Tuesday, he stepped through the door behind Mabel and felt the store change around him. Idella Sykes stood at the register with her hands folded too tightly. The butcher stopped wrapping meat. A woman in the cereal aisle pulled her purse closer. Elias pretended not to notice. He took a basket from the stack and followed Mabel toward the bread. Then a man he barely knew blocked the aisle. Grant stood behind him with his arms crossed, calm as a Sunday banker. "We do not need your kind in here," the man said. Elias looked at him. "My kind drifters sniffing around old ladies," the man said loud enough for every shelf to hear. "Everybody knows what you are doing." Mabel turned sharply. "How dare you?" Grant stepped forward. "Aunt Mabel, please. People are only concerned." "She is not your aunt," Elias said before he could stop himself. The whole store went silent. Grant's eyes hardened, but his voice stayed soft. "You see, he is already speaking for you." Elias felt the trap close. If he argued, he looked dangerous. If he stayed quiet, he looked guilty. Hunger had taught him many things, and one was this. Rooms like that did not give poor men the benefit of the doubt. He set the basket down. Mabel reached for his sleeve, but he gently pulled away. "It is all right," he said. It was not all right. He walked out with his back straight, because bending would have given them too much. Behind him, Idella Sykes said nothing. Grant held the note on her store, and silence was the payment he collected every month. That afternoon, someone crossed the street to avoid Elias. By evening, nobody at the salvage yard would meet his eye. 2 days later, Grant climbed the hill to Mabel's white house and suggested a facility where she could be looked after. "People call it care," Mabel said, "when they mean control." Grant left smiling. The next morning, he called the county office and reported that an elderly widow was wandering to an abandoned house, speaking to empty rooms, and being influenced by a homeless man. A social worker was assigned. Mabel had 11 days before a stranger with a clipboard would decide whether her promise, her grief, and her home still belonged to her. The clock had started running fast. Silas Boone did not like stories that began with maybe. Maybe this is your chance. Maybe these people will keep you. Maybe somebody is looking for you. He had heard too many maybes as a child, and every one of them ended with a packed trash bag and a new porch light shining on a house that was not his. By 34, Silas had learned to trust weight more than words. A wrench had weight. Scrap metal had weight. Hunger had weight. Hope did not, and that made it dangerous. He worked beside Elias behind the Hartwell textile mill, pulling brass fittings from machines that had once fed half the town. Silas was broad as a doorway and quiet as a locked room. Men mistook his size for hardness until they saw him move a turtle from the road or leave half his supper for a stray dog. Elias knew better. Silas had a gentle heart wrapped in barbed wire. At night, when the mill yard went black and the frogs started up beyond the ditch, the two men slept in the old delivery van with their coats pulled to their chins. Elias often woke coughing. Silas often woke from dreams he would not name, and sometimes before sleep took him fully. Silas hummed. 3 soft notes. The first lifted like someone looking through a window. The next 2 fell low, almost tender. Then came a pause that made the tune feel unfinished, as if it were waiting for a voice on the other side. Elias had heard it for 2 years. He had never cared where it came from. Then one Tuesday, standing beside the abandoned bungalow, he heard Mabel Whitaker hum the same tune into the empty doorway. Not similar. The same. The sound followed him for days. He heard it while stripping copper. He heard it while washing his hands in a gas station sink. He heard it beneath Grant Whitaker's rumors and beneath the shame of being walked out of Sykes' grocery. By Thursday night, Elias could not keep quiet. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked. Silas sat on an overturned crate rubbing oil from a bolt. "What song?" "The one you hum when you sleep." Silas's face closed. "I do not hum. You do." "Then I do not know." "Think." "I said I do not know." The words came out sharper than Silas meant, and Elias let the silence rest between them. He had learned that some doors opened only if you stopped pushing. After a while, Silas reached under his shirt and pulled out the little wooden fox he wore on a leather cord. It was worn smooth from years of thumb and worry. "Only thing I had when they found me," he said. Elias had seen it before, but never with Mabel's house in his mind, never with shelves full of carved foxes. never with the way she touched the underside of each one like a prayer. "Can I see it?" Elias asked. Silas's hand closed around it. "No." "All right." The next Tuesday was the last before the county woman came. Mabel was walking slower now. Her breath caught on small hills. Her hand trembled when she paid for milk. Elias looked at Silas that morning and made the choice before fear could talk him out of it. "Come with me," he said. Silas frowned. "To the widow, to Tan Yard Road." "No, I need you there." Silas stared at him. Elias had never said that before, not once in 2 years. The big man looked away toward the dead mill windows, toward every place that had ever let them sleep without belonging to them. "This better not be one of your maybes," he said. Elias picked up the grocery bags. "I think it might be an answer." And answers, Silas knew, were sometimes more frightening than hunger itself. The road to Tan Yard felt different with Silas behind them. Mabel noticed at once. A woman who had spent 30 years listening to absence knew when a new silence entered the day. She glanced back twice, but did not ask. Elias had told her only that his partner could help. Silas kept his hands in his coat pockets and his eyes on the road. He looked large for the morning, too guarded for the soft light. Every few steps he seemed ready to turn back. Elias stayed close enough to stop him with a look. At the bungalow, weeds brushed their legs. The dead oak leaned over the roof. The porch waited with broken boards and a dark door. Mabel took the cornbread from Elias. Her hands trembled, but she held on. "The third step is rotten," she said. "I remember," Elias answered. Silas looked at him. Remember, Elias did not explain. He placed the food in its old order. Cornbread first. Apple preserves beside it. Milk against the doorframe. Cinnamon drops last. Mabel climbed 2 steps, leaned toward the doorway, and spoke in the voice she saved for the dead. "I brought cornbread," she said. "Extra butter in it. Preserves, too. You never liked plain bread unless a man was starving, and even then you complained." Her mouth shook. "Eat before you go wandering, Caleb." Behind Elias, Silas shifted. The porch board creaked. He looked so uncomfortable that Elias thought he might leave. Then Silas began to hum. 3 soft notes, 1 rising, 2 falling. A pause at the end like a child waiting to be answered. Mabel stopped breathing. The sound died in Silas's throat when he saw her turn. She faced him slowly, as if any sudden movement might shatter what she had heard. "Where did you learn that?" she asked. Silas looked at the ground. "I do not know, ma'am." "Do not know, no, ma'am. I just always knew it." Mabel gripped the porch rail. The wood gave a warning crack, and Elias stepped closer, but she lifted one hand. "Hum it again," she whispered. Silas shook his head. "I cannot. Please." It was not a command. It was a woman asking mercy from a stranger. Silas swallowed. Then he hummed it once more. Mabel made a sound from 30 buried years. "My son made that tune," she said. "Caleb made it on this porch when he was 9. He had a pocket knife in one hand and pine in the other. He said every house needed a song in case somebody got lost." Silas stared at her. "Nobody knew it," Mabel said. "He never wrote it. He never played it in church. He hummed it only when he carved, and I sang it to him when he was small. There is no one alive who should know that song." The words fell between them. Elias looked at Silas's chest where the leather cord lay hidden. "Show her," he said. Silas stepped back. "No." "Silas, no." Mabel came down 1 step. "Son," she said, and the word broke something in him. With shaking hands, Silas pulled the wooden fox from under his shirt. It was small, darkened by years of skin and weather. One ear had chipped away. The tail curled close. Mabel reached for it, then stopped. Silas placed it in her palm. She turned it over. On the underside, cut by a young hand, were 2 letters. C.W. Mabel bent around the fox like a person struck by light. Caleb Whitaker, she breathed. He carved this. He carved this. Silas's face twisted. I was found with it. Where 3 counties over, they told me nothing. Mabel sat on the step before her knees could fail. The story came slowly. Caleb had not lived in that bungalow alone. A poor woman named Ruth Boone had loved him there. Mabel never knew. After Caleb died of fever, Ruth must have feared the house on the hill, feared they would take her child or turn her away. She fled. Later she died, and the boy disappeared into foster care under her name. Boone. Silas Boone. Mabel looked at the man before her at the wounded eyes. I was feeding a ghost, she whispered. Elias shook his head. No, ma'am. He looked at the food by the door, the porch, the fox in her hands, and the man who had carried a song without knowing it was home. You were walking to where your grandson began. The county social worker arrived 2 mornings later in a gray sedan with a dented door and a clipboard under her arm. Her name was Mrs. Larkin, and she had the careful face of a woman used to entering houses where everyone wanted something different from her. Grant Whitaker met her on Mabel's porch, wearing a clean shirt and a grieving expression he had practiced in the mirror. I only want what is best for her, he said. Mabel opened the door herself. Behind her stood Elias Mercer, freshly shaved with a borrowed razor, and Silas Boone, so large he filled the hallway like a question nobody could ignore. Mabel's hand rested on Silas's sleeve. Grant's eyes went to that hand. Mrs. Larkin stepped inside. She expected confusion. She found coffee set out, documents stacked neatly, medication bottles labeled by date, and an 82-year-old woman who could name every bill she had paid that month. She asked about the Tuesday walks. Mabel answered plainly. I was keeping a promise to my son, she said. Then she told the story. Not loudly, not dramatically. She spoke of Caleb, the bungalow, the fever, the food, the song, and the grandson who had stood on that porch carrying proof around his neck for 34 years. Silas placed the wooden fox on the table. Mrs. Larkin turned it over and read the initials. Grant said it could be coincidence. Nobody looked at him. By noon, Mrs. Larkin closed her clipboard. Mrs. Whitaker, she said, I see no reason to remove you from your home. Grant's face changed then just for a second. The concern slipped. The hunger showed. Mabel saw it. So did Elias. So did Mrs. Larkin. After that, Wren learned the truth, the way small towns learn anything from one porch to another, from the grocery register to the church steps, from the gas station booth where Grant had first planted his poison. By supper, everyone knew the old woman had not been wandering without reason. By nightfall, everyone knew Elias Mercer had been the only man decent enough to walk beside her. And by the next Tuesday, Grant Whitaker could not buy coffee in peace. No one shouted at him. No one threatened him. That would have been easier. Instead, people went quiet when he entered. They turned away from his handshakes. They remembered every worried word he had used like a polished blade. Within a month, his black sedan no longer appeared on Mill Street. Not one person asked why. The harder thing came for Idella Sykes. Elias entered her store one morning because Mabel needed milk and because a man cannot spend his whole life avoiding places where he was wounded. The bell above the door rang. Conversations faded. Idella looked at him from behind the register. Her eyes filled before he reached the counter. I should have spoken, she said. Elias set the milk down. You were afraid. That does not make silence right. No, he said, but it makes it human. She put a loaf of warm bread beside the milk and covered the price with her hand. Let me do this one thing. Elias looked around the store. This time nobody looked away. So he let her. Silas did not move into the white house on the hill that first night. Neither did Elias. Men who have lived too long on borrowed ground do not step easily into warm rooms and call them home. Mabel understood. She did not press. She made supper, set 3 plates on the table, and let the quiet do what begging could not. Silas stared at the food like it might disappear if he trusted it. Elias ate slowly, because he remembered what it felt like to watch bread leave his hands. Mabel watched them with eyes that had spent 30 years looking at an empty doorway. At last, Silas put down his fork. "He stays too," he said. Mabel looked at Elias. Elias shook his head. "Silas." "No," Silas said. "He is my brother, not by paper, not by blood. By every winter we survived. By every mile he walked beside me when nobody else knew my name. If he does not have a place here, then I do not either." Elias looked away because some kinds of love can be born only by pretending not to hear them. Mabel reached across the table and took Elias's hand. "Then both my boys are home," she said. The next morning, she gave Elias a key. It was brass-heavy and worn smooth at the teeth. It opened the foreman's house near the old Hartwell textile mill, a narrow place with a sagging porch and a workshop behind it. The roof needed patching. The windows needed cleaning. To Elias, it looked like a palace. Mabel stood in the doorway while he walked among the tools. Rusty saws, planes, clamps, a lathe under canvas, boxes of hinges, jars of nails sorted by size. "You fix what other people throw away," she said. Elias touched the workbench. "Mostly because I know what thrown away feels like." "Then stop sleeping beside dead machines," Mabel said. "Build something living." He tried to refuse the house. Mabel listened, then closed his fingers around the key. "A check would be charity," she said. "This is purpose." So Elias stayed. At first the town brought him things quietly. A chair with a broken leg, a porch rail split by weather, a church door that would not close, a child's wagon with one wheel missing. They left them at the workshop like offerings and came back to find them whole. Word spread. Soon, Elias Mercer was no longer the man sleeping behind the mill. He was the man who could fix anything. Silas took Tan Yard Road. He cut back the weeds around the bungalow. He hauled rotten boards from the porch and replaced them one by one. He cleaned glass from the floor. He patched the roof. Some days he worked without speaking. Some days Mabel sat in the yard and told him about Caleb. How he carved when angry. How he laughed with his whole face. How he hated cinnamon drops unless there were enough to share. Silas listened like a starving man learning the taste of his own history. The first night they lit a lamp inside the bungalow, Mabel cried hard and had to sit down. For 30 years that house had been a mouth she fed and never heard answer. Now light stood in the windows. Now her grandson moved through the rooms. Now the hungry one had come home. They did not leave food on the porch anymore. There was no need. On Tuesday mornings, Mabel still went to Sykes' grocery, but now Elias pushed the cart and Silas argued with her over milk because family gives you someone to argue with about small things. Wren changed slowly, which is the only honest way a town changes. People nodded to Elias. Then they spoke. Then they brought him coffee. Some apologized. Some only became kinder to the next person they might have ignored. That was enough. One evening, when summer leaned blue over Tan Yard Road, the 3 of them sat on the repaired porch. Mabel was in the rocker. Silas sat on the step below her. Elias leaned against the post he had sanded smooth. On the railing sat 2 wooden foxes. One was old, worn dark, by 34 years against Silas's chest. Caleb had carved it before he died, not knowing it would travel farther than he ever did. The other was new. Elias had made it in the workshop, careful and uncertain carving, until the shape felt right. It was not perfect. It leaned slightly to one side. Mabel said that made it honest. The two foxes sat together in the evening light, the blood you are given and the love you choose. If this story stayed with you, tell me which moment moved you most. Was it the song The Wooden Fox, or the moment the hungry one finally came home? Subscribe so the next story finds you. And remember what Elias Mercer knew before anyone thanked him for it. The kindness that changes a life is often the kindness given before you know it will ever come back.